of modern Israel. And that also is the increase of knowledge. Prophecy fulfilled brings the increase of knowledge and begins William Miller on his the beginning of his ministry, so to speak, and he starts to prophesy talk about the first angel's message. Actually, I believe it was 1831 that he started to talk about the first angel's message, but the point is, he did begin his ministry. He received his concordance in 1798, according to several sources, but he also started to look at the prophecies right here and began his increase of knowledge and also talking about the Lord's second coming. And yeah, in 1831, which is before the first angel's message, and I'll tell you why, because the first angel's message was the divine symbol. The divine symbol that was fulfilled in the Millerite time was the fulfillment of the prophecies of Revelation chapter 9, which is also, by the way, the sixth angel's trumpet, which is also the second woe, and it is the prophecy of the Ottoman Empire collapsing, and it was prophesied by all of the Millerites. William Miller, after 1798, began to gain a following that were called the Millerites. And these Millerites were preaching the first angel's message. But in 1840, they had prophesied that the Ottoman Empire would collapse on August 11th, 1840. And even one of the Millerites, named Josiah Litch, wrote several articles about the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. And so, sure enough, on August 11th, the four great powers of Europe, which I believe were France, Germany, Italy, and Great Britain. Now, don't quote me on that. I believe that's correct, but I'm going to assume that it is. But let's move on. Double check for yourself. I could be wrong on that, but that once that prophecy was fulfilled, that gave a great impetus to the Millerite movement, to William Miller and his divine symbol. Remember, I mentioned the divine symbol can be a prophecy fulfilled, and in this case, it was a prophecy fulfilled. And immediately after, they had a great groundswell of preachers that wanted to join the Millerites movement. And so following that begins the first test, really. The activities of the enemy, the Protestant churches start closing their doors and realizing, hey, this is kind of threatening our business, so to speak. You can almost look at the Millerites as in competition with the existing Protestant churches of the day. They're going to steal our congregation. They're going to steal our sheep. And you know, if these preachers were following the Lord and truly doing the Lord's work, they wouldn't care whether, if they heard the message and learned the message and ate the little book of Daniel, so to speak, which begins the testing process, they would understand that is a correct understanding of the fulfillment of prophecy. They would have joined the Millerites, and many of them did, and some didn't. And the ones that didn't began to close their door. And so under the activities of the enemy, they hadn't completely closed their door, but they started to close their door. That was the beginning of the activities, the activities of the enemy. 1842, actually, in May of 1842, William Miller and I believe it was von Himes decided that they were going to put a chart together, a prophecy chart, and we know it today as the 1843 chart. I'm sure you saw it earlier. But that chart was produced in May of 1842, and they call it the 1843 chart because it prophesied the Lord's return in 1843. But in May of 1842, once these Millerites started using the charts, the Millerites came, all the other Millerites came to William Miller and said, we need to stop using the word if when the Lord comes. It's on the charts. We need to say that he is coming in 1843 and take the if out of the message. And at that point, all of the Protestant churches formally closed their doors and, in a sense, almost persecuted William Miller and the Millerites from about a month later, in about May of 1842. June of 1842. And May is when they produced the charts and started using them, and a month later, in June, is when a door officially closes for the Protestants. Now, I want to mention that there's like four between the two reform lines of the Millerites and 144,000. There is 4 door closings here. There's two temple cleansings for each reform line. The first door being closed was the door of the Protestant churches, which symbolized the world. They symbolized the world for us, the Protestant world. We know the Seventh-day Adventists are symbolized the children of Israel. So in 1842, the door closes for the world, the Protestant world and the rest of the world first. And then in 1844, there was, as we know, the Great Disappointment. The Lord didn't come, but prior to that, the power of God happened in the Midnight Cry, which was the correct understanding of the antitypical Day of Atonement, which I'm going to talk about this down here, but the Day of Atonement was the 6th feast of the children of Israel, and at that point, they understood the timing correctly. They still didn't understand the meaning of the sanctuary being cleansed. They still understood it. They still believed it to be the earth. But they figured out in August of 1844 that the Lord wasn't supposed to come, or I should say that the sanctuary wouldn't be cleansed until October of 1844. And that happened at what they called the true midnight cry. So after the true midnight cry came 2 months later, August, September, October, 3 months later, came the Great Disappointment. And at the Great Disappointment, the Lord didn't come on October 22nd, but that was the second door closing. Now, the second door closing was a closing of the Millerites, and here's why. Here's what I want you to understand. The Millerites represent the children of Israel. They represent the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And in 1841, there was, remember, starting after, really at 1840 through 1842 to 1843, the Millerites swelled in their ranks so fast in just 4 years, they went from about 300 in 1840 to about 50,000 in 1844. And 50,000 on October 22nd were really, they were disappointed. But here's what happened. At 1844, on October 23rd, about 49,950. That's a huge number, but 49,950 walked away from the Millerite movement and went into their respective churches, or their churches that they came out of, where a lot of them left altogether, just left the Lord's house altogether, so to speak. But point is they were cleansed. They went from 50,000 down to 50 Millerite preachers. That is the ratio there of about 1,000 to 1. So at that point, the door was closed, and a prophecy was fulfilled there. That again, it was the antitypical Day of Atonement. The day after, I believe it was the day after, one of the Millerites by the name of Hiram Edson, who also wrote the Times of the Gentile articles, many of the Times of the Gentile articles, which he didn't get to complete, but he had a vision. I believe it was October 23rd, the day after the Great Disappointment, that and by the way, Sister White and James White, I believe, named one of their children after Hiram Edson. But he had a vision that the Lord moved from the holy place to the most holy place, and that he wasn't supposed to come to the earth, and that was the true understanding of the antitypical Day of Atonement, not the Lord coming to the earth. And so there was the Great Disappointment, as we know, the disappointment that comes after every judgment. There was a judgment on the 49,950 Millerites, whereas earlier the judgment was on the Protestants that didn't join the Millerites. So the door closing here was the door closing on the world first, and then the door closing on the Lord's church second. And when we get down here in the 144,000, you'll see that it's reversed. Okay, so the door closed on the Millerites, and after 1843, 8 years later, I say 1843, I say 8 years later, it was 1844 that the 1843 chart was produced. Oh, by the way, the 7 in that is that on immediately following the Great Disappointment is when they also learned about the Sabbath, and learned Sabbath reform through Joseph Bates. So immediately between the third angel's message and the fourth angel's message, you get a second chart, the 1850 chart, really typifying and symbolizing the two charts, or the two tables of the Ten Commandments, symbolizing in the same thing in the Millerite movement, the two charts which return to the foundations, the old past, which we'll talk about. And so that's where we're at now. We're at the 18, and the fourth angel's message, really, Babylon has fallen. Some people put down here, and it very well may be accurate, is that the 1888 conference was another great manifestation of the Lord, and that the Lord could have come and wanted to come back then, but we did not fulfill our duty and obligations as the Lord's people to carry the message, and so the Lord did not return in 1888. But I also put down here Sabbath reform.